So there's a reminder of a Zen story. And it's the story of that young and able-bodied man who was brought up in a remote village of the land of the rising sun, but he was conscripted into the service of the Shogun. But because he did not know the ways of the sword, or even war or combat, he was sent to be tutored by one of the great swordsmen of the day, who was called Lord Yagyu. Now, Lord Yagyu also studied Zen, and Lord Yagyu prided himself on being able to judge the worth, the hearts of anyone who came to him. So when the young man presented himself to Lord Yagyu summed him up and said, "Tell me, what school of swordsmanship have you been practicing before?" The young man said, I've never had a teacher. I've never learned the ways of the sword." Lord Yagyu looked at him and he said, "Don't lie to me. Tell me, who taught you the ways of the sword?" And the young man bowed low to Lord Yagyu and said with sincere apologies, "Master, I mean no offense, but I have never held a sword in my hand." But then the young man thought for a moment, and he said, "But many years ago I witnessed death, and after that witnessing, I decided to make inquiry into death. So I studied death in all its forms from many different angles, and I now find myself not afraid of death." Lord Yagyu looked at this young man and he said, Go, you are already a master swordsman. I can teach you nothing." Then there's a story about a great king who had an only daughter, who grew up to be the most beautiful of maidens. At the age of 18, the king and the queen called her to them. Her name was Satvitri, and they said to her, "It is now time for you to find a suitable husband. We will call together the princes of the realms for you to choose your husband." And Satvitri said, "Wait, let me go out into the world and seek out the wise men, those holy men and women whom with I can consult, and then I will choose my husband." So the princess, with a retinue of servants, went off into the kingdom, and she traveled here and there. But then one day she was walking in a forest when she saw ahead of her a tall and handsome young man with an axe over his shoulder and a bundle of wood under his arm. His bearing was so noble and dignified, she immediately fell in love with him, and on inquiry she found out that he was a prince, the son of a king. That king had been sent off into exile because he had become blind. So he and his queen lived in the forest where their son Satyavana was his name, took care of them by chopping wood and gathering wood. So the princess went back to her mother and father and said, I have found the man I wish to marry. He is Satyavana, the son, a prince. Now it so happened that the great sage Narada was present in the castle at that time, and when he heard these words, he came forth and said, No, no, no. This young man, Satyavana, is destined to die in 1 year from now. Satvitri will be rendered a widow. But Satvitri was adamant. She was going to marry her prince. And so messengers were sent off to the exiled king and queen, who gave their permission for the marriage on the proviso that the Princess Satvitri would come to live with them in the forest. This she readily did, and the marriage took place. And Satvitri and Satyavana lived in conjugal bliss for some months, but Satvitri kept careful count of the days, and she insisted that she travel into the forest where her husband gathered the wood each day. But one day, on the designated day, whilst they were in the forest, Satyavana said, I feel very tired. I have a terrible headache. Let us sit under this tree. So Satyavana lay down with his head on Satvitri's lap and lapsed into a deep sleep. After a while, Satvitri saw coming towards them the dark and shrouded figure of Yama, the god of death. And he put a rope around Satyavana's soul. And he said to Satvitri, Do not fear, I have not come for you. I have come for the soul of Satyavana. And with that, Yama took the soul and led it along a long path, but Satvitri followed. Yama turned around and said, Go back, young woman. You cannot come with me into the realms of death. But she continued to follow. So Yama turned around and said, Go back. I will fulfill one wish for you. And she said, Please give back the sight of my father-in-law, the king. It is done, said Yama. Now go back. You cannot follow. But Satvitri followed as Yama led the soul of Satyavana along the path to the realm of death. Again Yama turned around and said, Go back, young woman. She continued to follow. So Yama said, I will give you another boon, another wish, but you must go back. And Satvitri said, well, please restore the kingdom of my father-in-law. It is done, said Yama. Now return from whence you came. But Satvitri continued to follow. Yama turned around again and said, come no further. You must go back. I will give you a final boon, and that is all. Ask something for yourself. And she said, then may I have many sons and live to see the children of those sons. It is done, said Yama. Now go. But Satvitri said, sir, do you not know that according to our laws, a widow can never remarry? So Yama knew that he had been outwitted, and he let go the rope that entwined Satyavana's soul. Satvitri returned to the tree, and Satyavana woke up and stretched himself and said, I've had such a strange dream. I thought that I had died. We know the end of the story. But what could these stories and our awareness of death and its meaning for us have to do with our inquiry into form is emptiness, and emptiness is form? What is our relationship with death now? And our experience of examining it, facing it, perhaps impacts on our inquiry. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. What is the relevance of death to this? How many times in your life have you felt dead, empty, voided? How many times in your life have you said, this is done, I'm done with this?
It was interesting in the story that